Sometimes it's just impossible to do an experiment as much as we'd like to. We have to rely on observational studies. There's two times this can happen. One would be when it would just be very inconvenient or expensive to do an experiment, then we would want to rely on observational studies. Or the second one would be when it would be unethical to impose treatments on participants in a study. For example, does smoking cause cancer? We know, of course, now that it definitely does, but we did not do experiments to find this out. That would be unethical to take a random selection of people in our population and ask them to start smoking if they weren't a smoker, or ask them to, there's just so many ethics there that we have to be aware of. So we really don't want to do smoking as an experiment. All we can do is kind of track the people who currently are smokers and compare them to the general population to see if there is a statistically significant difference in their rates of cancer to the regular population. So, how can we do this to actually establish causation, especially when we're talking about legal uh, standings, and how did they prove this when they went to court? Like I said, we're going to look to see if there's enough statistical significance. So, in other words, is there a strong association between people who smoke and having cancer versus the general population having cancer? So, is there a stronger association between those two things than there would be in just the general population? Next, the association needs to be consistent throughout varying observations. When there were the first lawsuits against tobacco companies for the cause of cancer for smokers, the tobacco companies' defense was, well, how will you know that it's our cigarettes? It could be other things in their environment, or maybe they're drinkers, or maybe there's all sorts of different things. So while we cannot impose treatments, what we can do is narrow down our people that we are actually studying. And we could do that over the entire world to look at a variety of different samples from a variety of different populations. So we can look at people who don't drink but they do smoke. We can look at people who live near coal mines, coal processing plants, and smoke. We can look at people in India and smoke. We can look at people all over and try, and rather than imposing treatments to a variety of people to get to kind of control for those confounding variables, instead we can just replicate this over and over again and try to control the samples we get in a variety of ways. The next way we can establish this causation is larger values of explanatory variable are associated with stronger responses. So basically what this means is if you smoke more than the average person, you are more likely to get cancer than the average person. So it's that varying. So if you have a person who's just smoking like once or twice a week, and they are less likely to get cancer. Even a person who's maybe smoking 5 cigarettes a day, not as likely as somebody who's smoking 2 packs a day. Also, how long have they been smoking? Did they start smoking when they were very young, 14 years old, and they've been smoking and now they're 50, and there's this long period of time? Are those people more likely to get cancer than those who have been smoking for a shorter period of time? So that, let me just summarize that one for you. Longtime smokers and those who smoke more often are more likely to get lung cancer. So if we can show that there's that association even within the smokers themselves, that's the third way. Now remember, we have to be able to do all these things, and I still have two more to go. Fourth one, the alleged cause precedes the effect of time. So this one is saying that when smoking started, there was actually a lag of about 30 years. It takes about 30 years for lung cancer to develop. So major smoking and major tobacco companies, when that became commercialized, there was an association almost exactly 30 years later of an increase of lung cancer. That was harder to establish with men, but with women in the 1930s, I believe, women began smoking more and more and more than they ever did before. And you can see a direct association 30 years later, after the popularity of smoking in women reached its peak. 30 years later, there were more and more cases of lung cancer in women. So that is what this one means, is the alleged cause precedes the effect of time. Smoking started 30 years later, increase in lung cancer. The last one is that the alleged cause has to be actually plausible. For example, we wouldn't say that bubblegum causes cancer because there's been an increase of chewing gum. That maybe that's true. Maybe there was an increase of chewing gum around the same time there was an increase in smoking, but it's not plausible that gum causes cancer. And here's the difference, is we can actually, while we cannot do experiments on human populations, we can unfortunately do experiments on animal populations. And we were able to show through those experiments on animals that cigarette smoke did cause cancer, and specifically the tars from cigarette smoke did cause cancer in animals. So it is plausible that that same effect would be a cause in human beings. Let's get into those data ethics a little bit. So we're going to give some more details about these terms. So one way to ensure that you have ethical studies is that, especially in like university settings, medical settings, all planned studies must be reviewed in advance by an institutional review board charged with protecting the safety and well-being of the subjects. This is especially true in human experiments, but we're also seeing this in effect for animal experimenting more and more, and that we're making sure that our animals are being treated ethically. Another thing they do is they determine if studies are statistically sound and will actually provide valuable information. You don't want to do a study, especially on humans or animals, that is just meaningless or frivolous or will not give you any useful information anyways. Sometimes people just get a whim and want to see, hey, you know, what will happen if I bounce a basketball off of a human being's head 3,000 times? It's an interesting question, but it's not really anything that's valuable or something that would be useful to better society. Boards will actually make suggestions or maybe even require changes to the plans of a study if they find that the safety, the meaningfulness, or well-being of the subjects could be in jeopardy. So they can actually shut down or require significant changes before a study proceeds. Next, it's also important that subjects in a study are giving their informed consent before the data is collected. So subjects have to be able to understand in advance of the study about the nature of the study and any risks of harm it might bring. Now, this isn't saying you have to explain every detail, because some of that, because of placebo effects and blind studying, may jeopardize the information, may actually create some confounding variables if you tell your subjects too much. But they've got to understand that there's maybe a possibility they're going to be receiving the placebo and not the actual treatment that they're hoping for. Things like that. They might, like if they're experimenting with a new drug and they're already taking a drug that is helping them, they need to understand that the new drug might give them some side effects or less usefulness, less potency than they are used to. Those are all the things they must understand for beginning the study, so that they understand the risks and they can give informed with all the information and then give their consent before participating. And finally, we want to make sure we have some confidentiality in our studies when we're dealing with humans. And only the summaries, the information about the results should be made public. We should not share information about the individuals with the public in any way, shape, or form that could cause some problems. This does not mean that anonymity. It does not mean that they're completely anonymous. Information should be tracked by the researchers, but kept private. So those details might be important for further testing or studying. There might be something they want to follow up on with a certain individual if there's any anomalies in the data that they collect. So just remember, confidentiality does not always mean anonymity. Sometimes there are anonymous studies and there's no way to go back and find those people. But very often they are not anonymous and the researchers can do follow up when necessary.